The detective's knuckles hit my front door 3 times, firm, professional, the kind of knock that says, "This isn't a social call." I looked through the peephole and saw his badge already out, held up where I could see it clearly. Detective Morrison, Fraud Division. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob, not from fear but from something else entirely. Relief, maybe, or vindication, or perhaps just the exhaustion of carrying a secret that had been eating me alive for 2 weeks. I opened the door. "Mrs. Patterson?" he asked, his voice carrying that practiced tone of authority mixed with carefully measured sympathy. "Yes, Detective. I've been expecting you. My name is Catherine Patterson. I'm 72 years old, and until 6 months ago, I thought I had raised a son who married a good woman. I was wrong about the second part. Let me back up because this story doesn't start with a detective at my door. It starts 3 years earlier, at my son David's wedding to a woman named Melissa. She was 34, he was 38. They'd met at work, both accountants at the same firm downtown. She seemed lovely at first, polite, soft-spoken, the kind of woman who said all the right things at all the right times. I should have known better. I should have seen the signs. But I was a mother who wanted her only child to be happy. And sometimes we see what we want to see instead of what's really there. For the first year of their marriage, Melissa was perfect. Too perfect, I realize now. She called me every Sunday like clockwork. She brought homemade cookies to our family dinners. She laughed at my husband George's terrible jokes and asked about my garden and my bridge club and my volunteer work at the hospital. She even helped me organize George's old photographs, spending entire afternoons sorting through decades of memories with what seemed like genuine interest. "You're so lucky to have a daughter-in-law like that," my friend Patricia told me one afternoon over coffee. "Mine won't even return my phone calls." I smiled and agreed, feeling grateful, feeling blessed, feeling like my son had finally found the partner he deserved. George died 2 years ago this coming March, sudden heart attack. One minute he was trimming the hedges in the morning sun. The next he was lying on the grass, gone before the ambulance even arrived. David and Melissa were wonderful during that time. They helped with the funeral arrangements, dealing with the endless paperwork that death demands. They came over every weekend for months afterward to check on me, to make sure I was eating, to help with things around the house that George used to handle. I was vulnerable. I was grieving. And I was grateful for their presence in my life. That's when things began to shift. About 6 months after George passed, Melissa started bringing up my finances. Casual questions at first, slipped into regular. Conversation like they were nothing more than friendly concern. "Mom, Catherine, are you managing okay with all the bills? I know it can be overwhelming when you're dealing with everything alone. Have you thought about updating your will? George's passing must have changed things legally. You know, David and I were talking, and we worry about you in this big house all alone. Have you considered your options for the future?" I brushed it off initially. She was an accountant, after all. Numbers were her world. I told myself she was just being helpful, looking out for her mother-in-law's best interests. But the questions became more frequent, more specific, more pointed. "Do you have a living trust set up? Who's handling your investments now that George is gone? Have you thought about power of attorney? What if something happens and someone needs to make decisions for you?" I started to feel uncomfortable. There was something in her tone that I couldn't quite identify, something hungry beneath the concern, like she wasn't just asking questions, she was gathering intelligence. One evening, about 8 months ago, they came over for dinner. I'd made pot roast, George's favorite, though it felt strange cooking it without him there to enjoy it. We were sitting at the table, and I was just serving the vegetables when Melissa pulled out a folder from her oversized purse. "Mom, Catherine," she said, sliding it across the table toward me with a practiced smile. "David and I have been talking, and we think it's time we help you get your affairs in order. You know, for your peace of mind." I set down the serving spoon and opened the folder. Inside were documents, legal documents, pages and pages of them, with colored tabs marking where signatures were needed. My name was already typed in, waiting for my pen. "What is this?" I asked, my appetite suddenly gone. David cleared his throat. He wouldn't look at me, his eyes fixed on his plate. "It's just some paperwork, Mom, to make things easier, in case anything happens." "What kind of paperwork?" Melissa's smile never wavered. If anything, it widened. "Power of attorney, mostly. So David can help you with financial decisions if you need it, and we've taken the liberty of getting some property assessment documents together. This house is worth quite a bit now, and the market is excellent right now. We thought you might want to consider selling, downsizing to something more manageable. Maybe a nice retirement community where you'd have people around, activities, that sort of thing." My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. "Selling the house? I've lived here for 43 years. George and I raised David here. We planted every tree in that yard. We chose every tile in the bathroom renovation." "I know, Mom," David said quickly, finally meeting my eyes. "We're not saying you have to. We're just saying it's an option. And having power of attorney would just make things smoother. Melissa deals with this stuff every day at work. She knows how important it is to have these things in place before there's a crisis." I closed the folder carefully, buying time to think. "I appreciate your concern, but I'm not ready to make any decisions about the house, and I don't see why I would need to give anyone power of attorney. I'm perfectly capable of managing my own affairs." Melissa's smile tightened just slightly at the corners. Her eyes went hard for just a fraction of a second before the mask slipped back into place. "Of course you are, Mom Catherine. We're not suggesting you aren't capable. We just want to make sure you're protected. You know how complicated these things can get. Probate, estate taxes, healthcare decisions. It's overwhelming even for people who work in finance." "I'll think about it," I said, which was my polite way of saying no. The dinner ended earlier than usual. Melissa packed up the folder with sharp, precise movements. David kissed my cheek and told me he loved me, but he wouldn't quite meet my eyes again. I stood at the door and watched them walk to their car, watched Melissa's rigid posture, the way she got in the passenger seat without saying goodbye. After they left, I sat in my living room for a long time, staring at nothing in particular. The house felt different somehow, less safe. Something felt wrong, very wrong. Over the next few weeks, the pressure increased. Phone calls from Melissa about just checking in on those documents. David stopping by unannounced to ask if I'd thought any more about what we discussed. Subtle comments about my age, my health, my ability to manage the house alone. "You left the stove on last week, Mom," David mentioned one afternoon, his voice carrying what he probably thought was gentle concern. "That could have been dangerous." I'd been boiling water for tea and stepped into the living room for 2 minutes to water my plants. The stove wasn't on. The burner was on with a kettle on it, doing exactly what it was supposed to do. I was making tea, David. I was right here in the house. I could hear the kettle. I'm just saying, these things happen as we get older. It's nothing to be ashamed of. Mom, I love you, and I just want to make sure you're safe. I'm 72, not 92. My mind is as sharp as it's ever been. I balance my checkbook to the penny every month. I manage my investments. I take care of my house and my garden and myself. I volunteer at the hospital 3 days a week. But they were creating a narrative, I realized. A narrative of decline, of incompetence, of need. They were building a case for why I couldn't be trusted to manage my own life. The breaking point came 3 months ago. I had a dentist appointment on a Tuesday morning. Routine cleaning, nothing special. When I came home 2 hours later, parking my car in the Itsiaoi driveway at 11:30 instead of the 1 o'clock I'd told them I'd be back, Melissa's car was there. I found her in George's old study, which I'd been slowly converting into a craft room. She was sitting at his desk, going through the drawers, documents spread across the surface. "Melissa, what are you doing here?" She jumped, actually jumped, and knocked over a stack of papers. Her face went white. "Oh, Mom, Catherine, you scared me. I thought you'd be gone longer." My cleaning was quick. "What are you doing in my desk?" I watched her face as she calculated, as she decided on her lie. David mentioned you were looking for some old tax returns, so I thought I'd help you find them while you were out." The lie was smooth, practiced, but her hands were shaking as she gathered the papers. "He gave me the spare key you gave him for emergencies." "I never said I was looking for tax returns. I keep all my tax documents in the filing cabinet in the basement. I've kept them there for 30 years. "Oh, maybe I misunderstood. You know how it is." She laughed, but it sounded hollow, forced. "Well, since I'm here anyway, have you given any more thought to those documents we discussed? It would really set David's mind at ease. He worries about you constantly, you know." "Melissa, I need you to leave. Now." Her expression changed. The mask didn't just slip. It fell away completely, and I saw something cold and calculating underneath, something that had been there all along, hiding behind the cookies and the Sunday phone calls. "Mom, Catherine, I'm only trying to help. We're family. Family helps each other." "We're not family. You married my son. That doesn't give you the right to go through my private papers." She stood up slowly, gathering her purse with deliberate movements. Her voice dropped, became harder. "You know, Mom Catherine, David worries about you. We both do. It's hard watching you struggle to keep up with everything. But if you won't let us help you, if you're going to be stubborn about this, well, I hope you don't regret it. Things happen to people who live alone. They fall. They get confused. They make mistakes with their medication. It would be terrible if something happened to you." The implied threat hung in the air between us, ugly and undeniable. "Get out of my house!" She walked past me, her shoulder deliberately brushing mine. At the front door, she turned back one more time. "We're trying to help you, Mom Catherine, but we can only help if you let us. Think about that." After she left, I sat down at George's desk with shaking hands. My personal files had been thoroughly disturbed. Bank statements, investment records, insurance policies, the deed to the house. Everything had been looked through. Documents out of order, some lying open on the desk. I spent the next hour checking everything, making sure nothing was missing. That's when I found it. In the file where I kept important legal documents, there was a power of attorney form. Not the blank one she'd shown me at dinner, but one that had been filled out. My name was signed at the bottom, except I hadn't signed it. I held it up to the light, my heart pounding. The signature looked like mine, close enough that a bank might not question it. But I knew my own handwriting, knew the way I made my capital C, the particular loop of my P. This was close, but it wasn't mine. She'd practiced forging my signature. I sat there for a long moment, the document trembling in my hands, understanding flooding through me like ice water. This wasn't just about concern or family helping family. This was theft. This was fraud. This was premeditated, calculated patient theft. I changed my locks the next day. I didn't tell David. I didn't tell anyone. But I started paying attention. I started documenting everything. I bought a small security camera and installed it in the study, hidden behind books on the shelf where George used to keep his first editions. I started keeping my important documents in a safe deposit box at the bank. I made copies of everything in my files, photographing each page with my phone, and I started watching Melissa the way she'd been watching me. 2 weeks after the incident in my study, I had lunch with Patricia. We were at our usual cafe, and I was stirring my coffee when I decided to take a risk. "Patricia, can I ask you something? Have you ever felt like someone in your family might not have your best interests at heart?" She looked at me over her reading glasses. Patricia had known me for 35 years. She knew when something was wrong. "What's happened, Catherine?" I told her. Not everything, but enough. About the pressure, the documents, finding Melissa in my study. I didn't mention the forged signature. I wasn't ready to say that out loud yet. Patricia's face grew serious. "Catherine, my cousin went through something similar with her son-in-law. They got power of attorney, and within 6 months, she lost her house. By the time she realized what was happening, he'd taken out a reverse mortgage and spent the money. She's living in a nursing home now, and she can't afford anywhere else. What did she do? Nothing. She was too ashamed. Too afraid of what people would think if she accused her own family. She let it happen. I'm not going to let it happen. Patricia reached across the table and took my hand. Good. What do you need? The name of a lawyer. A good one. She wrote down a name on a napkin. Marcus Chen. Elder law specialist. I called him that afternoon. Marcus Chen's office was downtown, in one of those old buildings with real marble in the lobby and brass fixtures that had been polished for 100 years. He was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with kind eyes and a firm handshake. Mrs. Patterson, tell me what's been happening. I told him everything. The pressure, the documents, the forged signature, the threat. I showed him the power of attorney form with my forged signature. I showed him the photographs I'd taken of my disturbed files. He examined the signature through a magnifying glass, then looked up at me. This is forgery, Mrs. Patterson. This is a crime. I know. You could go to the police. I know that too, but she's my son's wife. David loves her. If I do this, I'll lose him. And if you don't? I'd been asking myself that same question for weeks. Then I lose everything else. Marcus leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. Here's what I recommend. We document everything. We get concrete evidence. We make sure that if you do decide to go to the police, they'll have an airtight case. And in the meantime, we make your affairs bulletproof. New will, healthcare directive, explicit instructions that no one has power of attorney unless you're physically incapacitated, and 2 doctors sign off. We make it legally impossible for her to do what she's trying to do. How long will that take? The legal protections? We can have them drafted and signed by the end of the week. The evidence gathering? That depends on what she does next. She'll try again. She's invested too much time to stop now. Marcus nodded slowly. Then we'll be ready. How tech-savvy are you, Mrs. Patterson? More than my children think. He smiled. Good. Because we're going to need you to be very careful and very patient and very brave. Over the next 6 weeks, I became someone I never thought I'd be. I documented everything. Every phone call, every visit, every comment. The security camera in my study recorded everything. I kept a journal, noting dates and times and exact quotes. And then, 3 weeks ago, Melissa made her move. I got a call from my bank. Mr. Rodriguez, my account manager for 15 years, sounded concerned. Mrs. Patterson, I have someone here claiming to have power of attorney for you. She's requesting access to your accounts. I wanted to verify this with you before proceeding. My heart was racing, but my voice stayed calm. I haven't granted anyone power of attorney, Mr. Rodriguez. Who is this person? Your daughter-in-law, Melissa Patterson. She has documents. Those documents are fraudulent. Don't give her access to anything. I'm calling my lawyer and the police. I hung up and immediately called Marcus Chen. Then I called Detective Morrison. The police took my statement that afternoon. I brought everything. The forged power of attorney, the photographs of my disturbed files, the security camera footage showing Melissa going through my desk, the journal documenting every incident. Marcus Chen sat beside me, explaining the legal implications, translating my elderly woman's story into something that sounded like the crime it was. Detective Morrison was in his 50s, with gray at his temples and the weary eyes of someone who'd seen too much. But when I showed him the forged signature, when I explained about my husband's death and Melissa's patience and the systematic way she'd been working to take control of my life, something hardened in his expression. Mrs. Patterson, how would you feel about having a conversation with your daughter-in-law, with us listening, documenting everything? You mean wear a wire? Like in the movies? Something like that. We need her to admit what she's trying to do. We need her to talk about the forgery, about accessing your accounts. Can you do that? I thought about George, about what he'd say. I thought about David, about what this would do to him. I thought about Patricia's cousin in that nursing home and all the other elderly people who'd been too afraid or too ashamed to fight back. Yes, I can do that. The plan was simple. I would call Melissa, tell her I'd reconsidered, that I wanted to discuss the power of attorney after all. I'd invite her over, and I'd get her to talk about what she'd been doing. Detective Morrison fitted me with a small recording device that clipped to my necklace. Just have a normal conversation. Ask her about the documents. If she admits to the forgery, to trying to access your accounts, we have what we need. Melissa arrived 20 minutes after I called her. She was wearing a business suit, her hair perfect, her smile bright. The mask was back in place, and I wondered if she actually believed her own performance. Mom, Catherine, I'm so glad you called. David will be so relieved that we can finally help you with all of this. We sat in the living room. I offered her tea. She declined, too eager to get to business. So, she said, pulling out yet another folder from her bag, I have the power of attorney documents here. Once you sign, we can get you set up with proper estate planning, maybe look at some retirement communities, really make sure your future is secure. Before I sign anything, I said carefully, I need to understand something. That form I found in my study, the one with my signature already on it. Did you practice signing my name, Melissa? Her smile froze. I don't know what you mean. I think you do. I found it after you went through my desk. The power of attorney with my signature, except I never signed it. She stood up, her movements jerky. Mom, Catherine, you must be confused. You probably signed it and forgot. This is exactly why we need to get these things in order now. Before what? Before you can forge any more of my signatures? Before you can try to access my bank accounts again? Her face went pale, then flushed red. Who have you been talking to? What lies are people telling you? Mr. Rodriguez at the bank called me. You tried to access my accounts. Melissa, using fraudulent documents. That's not... I was just trying to help you. You're getting confused, making mistakes. David and I are worried about you. We think you might need more care than you're willing to admit. So your solution is to steal from me? The mask shattered completely. Her voice turned hard, cruel. Steal from you? You're an old woman sitting on a fortune you're too stubborn to manage properly. David is your only child. That money, that house, it's going to be his eventually anyway. We're just trying to make sure it's managed properly before you do something stupid with it. So you forged my signature. I didn't... She stopped, realizing what she'd almost admitted. You practiced my handwriting. You created false documents. You tried to take control of my finances without my permission. That's called fraud, Melissa. She grabbed her purse, backing toward the door. You can't prove any of this. It's your word against mine, and you're an old woman who everyone knows is struggling. Who's going to believe you? The police might. She froze. What? I've already filed a report. They have the forged documents. The bank has a record of your attempt to access my accounts, and they have this conversation. I touched the recording device on my necklace. Melissa's face went through a series of expressions: shock, fear, rage, and finally, calculation. You're bluffing. Am I? Why don't we call Detective Morrison and find out? I picked up my phone. My hand was shaking, but I dialed the number Marcus had given me. Mrs. Patterson? Morrison's voice came through the speaker. We have everything we need. I'm outside with 2 officers. We're coming in now. The front door opened. Detective Morrison entered with 2 uniformed officers behind him. Melissa's legs seemed to give out. She sat down hard on my couch, her face ashen. I want a lawyer. That's your right, Morrison said. Melissa Patterson, you're under arrest for forgery, fraud, and identity theft. As they led her out in handcuffs, she looked at me one last time. There was no remorse in her eyes, just anger that she'd been caught. I stood in my doorway and watched the police car drive away, then sat down on my couch and cried. Not for Melissa, but for David, for the choice he'd have to make, for the family that would never be the same. The phone rang an hour later. David. Mom, they just arrested Melissa. They're saying she tried to steal from you. Tell me it's not true. Please tell me there's been some mistake. David, sweetheart, you need to come over. We need to talk. What did you do?" His voice was rising, panicked. "She's my wife. Why would you do this?" "David, come over, please." He arrived 20 minutes later, bursting through my front door without knocking. "Mom, what the hell is going on? The police are saying Melissa forged your signature, tried to access your accounts. That's insane. There must be some mistake." "There's no mistake." I kept my voice steady. "Sit down, David." "I don't want to sit down. I want to know why my wife is in jail." "Your wife is in jail because she committed fraud. She forged my signature on legal documents. She tried to steal from me." "That's ridiculous. Melissa would never—" "David." I pulled out the folder with all my evidence, the forged signature, the photographs of my disturbed files, the timeline of her escalating pressure, the transcript of her confession from earlier that day. "Look at this. All of it." He sat down then, slowly, his face draining of color as he read through document after document. I watched him process it, watched the denial fight with the evidence, watched his entire world restructure itself around this new, ugly truth. "She said she loved me," he whispered finally. "She might have, but she loved my money more." "I didn't know, Mom. I swear to God, I didn't know she was forging signatures or trying to access your accounts. I thought she was just trying to help." "I believe you, David." And I did. My son had been manipulated just as I had been, just in a different way. But you have to understand why I did this. She threatened me. She wasn't going to stop. And if she'd succeeded, I would have lost everything. My home, my independence, my security. What happens now? His voice was small, broken. "Now, the legal system takes over. She'll face charges. There will be a trial, probably a plea deal. You'll have to decide whether to support her or protect yourself." I don't know what to do. I reached across and took his hand, the way I had when he was small and scared. "You do what you think is right. You make your choice. And no matter what you choose, I'm still your mother, and I still love you." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about David, about the choice he was facing. I kept thinking about Melissa, about whether she understood the gravity of what she'd done. I kept thinking about George, about what he would have said, whether he would have approved of my decision to involve the police. But I also thought about all the other people like me. Elderly people, vulnerable people, people who might not have caught what was happening, who might not have had the strength to fight back, people who might have lost everything to someone they trusted. I'd made the right choice. I had to believe that. Detective Morrison called me 2 days after Melissa's interview at the station. "Mrs. Patterson, I need you to come down again. There have been some developments." When I arrived, he looked grim. "Your daughter-in-law denied everything at first, but we showed her the security footage, the handwriting analysis, the timeline, your recorded conversation. She asked for a lawyer." "What does that mean?" "It means she knows she's in serious trouble. Her lawyer has indicated she might be willing to make a statement, but—" He paused, sliding a folder across the table toward me. "Mrs. Patterson, there's more." Inside were more documents. Documents I'd never seen before. Applications for credit cards in my name. A loan application using my house as collateral. Checks written from my account, small amounts spread out over 6 months, all forged. All Melissa. "She's been doing this for a while," Morrison said quietly. "We pulled your full banking records. She's been skimming small amounts for months, probably practicing the signature, building up confidence before the bigger moves. She got greedy when she went for the bank accounts directly." I felt sick, not just from what she'd done, but from how calculated it had been, how patient, how deliberate. While she was bringing me cookies and asking about my garden, she was stealing from me. While I was grieving George, she was planning how to take everything he left me. How much? About $15,000 so far, in small transactions that you probably wrote off as memory errors when balancing your checkbook. But if she'd succeeded with getting her name on your accounts and deed, she would have had access to everything. Your entire estate, Mrs. Patterson. We're talking nearly $800,000 between the house, your investments, and your savings. The room felt too small, too hot. $800,000. Everything George and I had worked for, our entire life together, reduced to a number in a police report. What happens now? Now we build the case. With the evidence we have, the district attorney will likely file charges. Forgery, identity theft, fraud, multiple counts. She's looking at serious time if convicted. And David, Morrison's expression softened. Your son appears to have been manipulated. We don't have evidence that he was actively involved in the forgery or theft. He may have benefited from it if it had succeeded, but that's different from committing the crime himself. We've interviewed him separately. He seems genuinely shocked. Small comfort. Which brings me back to that morning 2 weeks later, when Detective Morrison knocked on my door. I'd been expecting him, but I still wasn't prepared for what he had to say. Mrs. Patterson, Melissa Patterson, has been arrested and formally charged with multiple counts of forgery, identity theft, and fraud. Her lawyer has indicated she wants to make a deal, but the district attorney wants to talk to you first. He needs to know if you're willing to proceed with full prosecution. What happens if I do? She'll likely accept a plea deal. Some jail time, probably a year or two given her lack of prior record. Restitution for everything she stole. A felony on her record. She'll never be able to work as an accountant again. And if I don't? The case probably gets dropped. She walks away, and she could do this to someone else. Someone who might not be as vigilant as you were. I thought about my friend Patricia, whose daughter-in-law won't return her calls. I thought about all the lonely widows in my bridge club, the women at my church, the vulnerable people who trust their families to take care of them. I want to proceed. Morrison nodded. I thought you might say that. There's one more thing. David Patterson is here. He's asking to speak with you. I told him I'd ask, but you're under no obligation. Send him in. Morrison stepped outside. A moment later, David appeared in my doorway. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in 2 weeks. His eyes were red, his face drawn, his shoulders slumped. Mom, he said, and his voice broke. Come in, David. We sat in my living room, the same room where Melissa had smiled and brought cookies and played the perfect daughter-in-law. The same room where she'd sat while plotting to steal everything George and I had worked for. I filed for divorce, David said. I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. I should have seen it. I should have protected you. She was my wife, and I should have known what she was capable of. You loved her. Love makes us blind sometimes. That's not an excuse. She was stealing from you, my own mother, and I let her. I didn't participate, but I didn't stop it either. I saw the signs and I ignored them because I wanted to believe in her, in us, in our future together. I wanted to believe that someone could love me the way she seemed to. David, look at me. I waited until his eyes met mine. What she did is not your fault. She lied to both of us. She manipulated both of us. You're a victim here too. But you're pressing charges against my wife, against a criminal who happens to be your wife. There's a difference. He was quiet for a long moment. I know you're right. It hurts, Mom. All of it hurts. I feel like such a fool. You're not a fool. You're a good man who trusted the wrong person. What happens now? With us? With our family? I reached out and took his hand. We heal. We rebuild. We learn from this. And we make sure it never happens again. You're my son, David. Nothing will change that. Melissa took a plea deal 3 months later. She pled guilty to 2 counts of forgery and 1 count of fraud. She was sentenced to 18 months in prison, 5 years probation, and ordered to pay full restitution, which I learned she would probably never be able to do, given that she'd already spent most of what she'd stolen. I attended the sentencing. David did not. I wanted to look her in the eye one more time. She looked smaller in her orange jumpsuit, her hair pulled back in a plain ponytail, no makeup. She glanced at me once, just once, and I saw something that might have been shame, or maybe just regret that she'd been caught. I'll never really know. The judge asked if I wanted to make a victim impact statement. I stood up. Your Honor, 3 years ago, I welcomed this woman into my family. I trusted her. I loved her. She betrayed that trust in the worst possible way. She didn't just steal money from me. She stole my peace of mind, my sense of security, my faith in people. She exploited my grief over my husband's death. She used my love for my son as a weapon against me. But I'm not here today out of vengeance. I'm here because what she did was wrong, and there have to be consequences for wrong actions. I'm here because the next elderly person she meets deserves to be protected. I'm here because we teach people how to treat us, and I will not teach anyone that they can victimize me without consequences. Melissa's lawyer helped her stand. I'm sorry, she said, but the words sounded hollow, empty, like she was reading from a script her lawyer had given her. I nodded once and sat back down. The judge handed down the sentence, and it was over. David and I have dinner together every Sunday now. He's in therapy, working through the manipulation and the betrayal. He's rebuilding his life, rebuilding his sense of self. We're rebuilding our relationship, finding our way back to the mother and son we were before Melissa, before the lies, before everything fell apart. Some of my friends think I was too harsh, that I should have handled it within the family, but I sleep soundly now, knowing I did the right thing. I protected myself, and maybe I protected others too. The house is still mine. The accounts are still mine. My independence is still mine. And sometimes, when I'm working in my garden or reading in George's old study or hosting bridge club in my living room, I think about that moment when Melissa said, she'll sign anything. But I signed nothing, and that made all the difference.